Hi, I'm Frank A. Lancione. On behalf of the Civil Discourse Club of the Villages, I'd like to welcome you to this podcast on what are CDDs, what are they about, and how do they operate. And I want to take on an issue in this podcast that I think you probably have wondered about and you discuss with your neighbors all the time. Who really controls quality of life in the villages? Well, what do we mean when we say quality of life? Well, I think you can look at these four factors. How well is the place maintained? Who maintains it? Who sets the standards for how it's maintained and who decides what we pay for that? How about architecture? Who decides what the architecture is? Who decides what you can do to your house? Who decides if the standards about what you can do to your house in your area change? How about the annual assessments you pay? When you signed your covenants, you agreed that you would pay, when you signed for your house, you agreed that you would pay for a bond. You might have paid it off at closing, or you might be paying it off annually as part of your annual tax assessment. Who's involved in that? How about your other financial issues? There's an annual maintenance assessment. Who's involved with that? And there's actually a monthly amenity fee. Who's involved with that? And then finally, a big part of our quality of life here in the villages are the facilities that we have. I mean, wonderful facilities, almost 3,000 clubs, wonderful recreation facilities, indoor, outdoor, archery, RC, boats, RC cars. I mean, it's really pretty amazing. So who's influencing that? Well, if you watch any of our other podcasts, you already know some of these answers. Let's take the idea of maintenance. The infrastructure for CDDs is originally approved by the boards of supervisors. That goes all the way back to when the CDD first starts. There's nothing there but a cow pasture, and the developer comes forward and says, I want to build the infrastructure for a community, and the original supervisors who were appointed by the original landowners, and they're the first supervisors of the CDD, they say, we'll accept your bid, the infrastructure is built, and that's how the community gets started. So that's the initial definition of it. But folks, after that, once all those supervisors elected by the landowners, their terms have expired, and now residents, the board is really 5 people elected by residents. The people that we elect decide how the place is going to be maintained. And they decide whether or not they're going to go through the district government and whether they're going to cooperate with the other CDDs. So that's something that people that we elect, they actually control how well we maintain things, what it costs to maintain, and how much we're going to pay for it. Well, let's go to this idea of architecture. Surely the developer is in charge of architecture. Well, that's absolutely true when you're talking about building out a new area. It's the developer's vision that creates the wonderful amenities that we have here. The idea is where we're going to put parks, and we're going to have putt and plays, we're going to have nature trails, we're going to have nature preserves, we're going to have roundabouts, we're going to have trails. All those things are part of the design of the person who first builds that. And that's true not just for the family here that's built the villages, but for any set of developers. But guess what? Once that happens, once that's all built, once the Board of Supervisors has transitioned to people who are residents of that CDD and are elected by residents of that CDD, well, it's the Board of Supervisors who's then responsible for determining what the architectural guidelines are, whether the existing ones will be changed. If there's appeals to the decisions of the Architectural Review Committee, it's heard by the CDD. Residents that we elect make decisions about what we can do to our properties, what's going to be built in our area that's new in terms of repairing things or changing, let's say, an open field to a dog park, whether you can put a pergola on the front side or back of your house only. Those are all decisions that are made by the people that we elect. So residents elected by residents, residents elected by us. How about assessments and finance? Well, we talked about the annual maintenance assessment. That's clearly done by the CDD Board of Supervisors. We've talked about the startup, your bond assessment. Those bonds were originally issued by the original supervisors, and the Board of Supervisors administered them. This past year in 2018, in the villages, one of the CDDs went out and refinanced their bonds so that they could lower the interest rates and give a better deal to their residents. In terms of finance, well, the CDDs are actually bigger business than you might think. CDD 10 has an annual operating budget of about $3.2 million. It's got almost $14 million in reserves. Other CDDs are equally large. So the people that we elect, the residents we elect to the board, who are also residents of our CDD, well, they handle the assessments and finance. Well, surely you're saying, gosh, now they can't be doing this, right? This has got to be somebody else. Well, it is somebody else. North of 466, there's a committee called the Amenity Advisory Committee. They actually were created as part of a out-of-court settlement from a class action suit that was brought by the residents north of 466 back in 2008. And one of the provisions was that an amenity advisory committee of residents, would be put in place, and they would make determinations on how the money that the developer pledged, which was $43 million over 10 years, would be spent. So residents, elected by residents, making determinations about how amenities funds are spent north of 466. So I guess north of 466 that's true, but how about south of 466? There's no pot of money from a court settlement. How does that get done? Well, south of 466, Lake Sumter Landing bought the amenities and the rights to collect amenity fees from the developer back in 2017. And at that time, they, along with the district government, asked the Project-Wide Advisory Committee, the PWAC, to play a role similar to the role played by the Amenity Advisory Committee north of 466, and to provide input and advice on matters relating to amenities. Folks, that's things like the cap on amenities, what fees should be for new homes versus old homes, which recreation facilities are going to be refurbished, what new things are going to be added, and a lot of policy issues. Now you might say, yeah, but they're just advisory. Yeah, they're just advisory. But the reality is, if you look at the record, they make good recommendations, and the commercial activities want the residents to be the ones to decide priorities. Things like more pickleball versus more glass fusion classes. So the reality is that the Project-Wide Advisory Committee has a big role in the policies that get set for our amenities and our recreation programs. So, my goodness, maintenance, architecture, assessments, finance, wow. So, what else is there in quality of life? Well, you could talk about personal relationships, but this is not Dear Abby. The reality is that on the stable stuff, we have a lot of control. In fact, if you were to say, who controls the life factors, the quality of life factors in the villages? Well, in a new area like Fenney, where the developer is still building, or McClure or DeSoto, and they are electing all of the supervisors, you've got a case to say that it's the developer. But the next time you're sitting around with a bunch of friends and they say, well, I'd like to see this happen, but the developer will never allow it, you got to think twice about that. Because the reality is, as Walt Kelly said, we met the enemy, and he is us. On behalf of the Civil Discourse Club of the Villages, I'm Frank A. Lancione. I'd like to thank you for listening to this podcast.